Welcome to Todd Neef's show, where I have conversations with interesting people and try to unpack their mental models of how they do things and learn from them and talk about it out loud so other people can potentially learn and enjoy as well. This time on the podcast, talking to Leonard Suryajaya. Leonard is a member at South Loop Strength and Conditioning and also a visual artist. He recently had some photos commissioned for the New York Times that I was a participant in, at least a handful of them. Some of them were taken at the gym. And I thought it would be pretty interesting to talk to Leonard about his work and how he thinks about his creative process, since his photos are fascinating and hilarious and bizarre and absurd and confrontational and all the stuff one would hope for in visual art. So we dig into some of that stuff. And I also, of course, had to take Leonard on an extended detour digging into the cultural relations and history of Indonesia, which I found super interesting and hopefully someone else does as well. So enjoy my conversation with Leonard Suryajaya. All right, so often when I do podcasts with people, I ask them to just pronounce their name for me before we start, even if I know them, just to make sure that I'm not going to pronounce it badly doing an intro or anything like that. But this time I figured that I'd make you start this podcast by telling the story of your name, and maybe even pronouncing it for everyone, since I'm sure you get some crazy pronunciations.
Yeah. I guess my name is Leonard Suryajaya. I guess a lot of people have called me worse names that when people just mispronounce my last name. I guess I take into consideration who they are. Some people I just roll my eyes. Some people, if it annoys me, I will annoy them too.
Nice adversarial relationship. Love it.
Yeah. But the whole story surrounding my name is also kind of funny, because my last name, Suryajaya, was supposed to be my first name and my last name. So Surya was supposed to be my first name and Jaya was supposed to be my last name. But my dad, like all Asian dad would do, he went to the temple, he went to pray, and then he asked God if that was the right name to give me. And I guess God says no. So I guess he had to figure out a different name. And because I was born a Leo, he gives me Leonard as my first name. And what was supposed to be my first and last name, he just made it into my last name. Surya means sun, and Jaya means victorious, because I was born at noon. So he figures, oh, this boy, I'm gonna give him this epic name. But turns out, God says no, figure out a different name. But in a sense, it's kind of awesome because it speaks so much about the history. When my dad was little, he had to change his name. He was born with a Chinese name, and the government made everyone who was born with Chinese names, made them change their names into Indonesian name or a Western name. And when my dad got his new name, he didn't have a last name. So,
like a soccer player.
Yeah, pretty much. He only have one name, and that is his name. So when I was born, it was more okay, what can we name this baby in a way that is respectful to God, but also kind of makes sense with what their experience was. And then when my sister was born, same thing. They just assigned her a random last name. And then after she was born, my dad legally added his last name. So now all four of us just have different last names. But yeah, my name is Leonard Suryajaya because I'm a Leo and I was born at noon. So that's the story of my name.
So not to push back, I guess, on the will of the divine creator, but if Suryajaya wasn't a good enough name for you, why was it acceptable to then just, sort of combine that into one name for your last name? One would think that you would have to have like a totally different name based upon that story.
Yeah, I don't know how he even made it work with God. Like, I mean, he just uses like, I don't know, this praying tool, basically I don't, two wooden, I will call it chips. So two wooden chips, he would pray and ask the question, and then he would throw it in the air, and then depending on how the chips fall, that's what God says. So apparently he asked 3 times for Suryajaya to be my first and last name. All 3 times God says no. And the rule is usually after 3 times, you better ask a different question now because God is gonna like get angry. So after 3 attempts, I guess that's when he figured out a different strategy. And when he came back to pray with Leonard Suryajaya, God granted him the okay.
Oh, okay, so that was actually approved. All right, that makes more
Yeah.
sense then.
So, yeah. So stupid.
Now, Leonard, be nice. So your family all have different last names then. And is that something that and that's not like a normal situation in any sort of Indonesian culture, is that correct?
I think for my generation, it's pretty common.
Oh, because a lot of people have the same naming convention problem.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Like, I mean, I won't go too much into it, but like in the history of like my background is Chinese Indonesian. So, like in the 60s there was this persecution towards communism, and of course at the time the first easiest signifier of spotting a communist would be to blame it on their skin color, and being Chinese was not a favorable thing to be. So knowing that history and how the naming convention comes about for a specific generation of people, I feel like, I don't know, it's kind of cool that I can tell that story, but I'm pretty happy, I guess. I think things are becoming better, so not that often anymore that people in one family would have different last names, maybe nowadays. Yeah, but because my parents, my dad was born in 59, my mom in 61. So just at that time in the history of Indonesia, as a newborn country, that was just the drama of the time and place. Yeah.
Have you seen the act of killing or the look of silence?
Yeah, I've seen the act of killing. It's kind of triggering in a sense because like it came out when I was in grad school, and all of my peers was like, "Oh, you have to watch this documentary because it's about Indonesia and you are Indonesian, you should watch it." Like I kind of knew what it was about and I was kind of dreading it. And then when I finally saw it, it was like set in my hometown. So like all of the backdrops of the interviews, all of the places they went through, it was just like my hometown. And it was just like, fuck, these people are crazy. And I don't know, but being able to watch it and kind of like take time thinking through it and then just reflecting on it, I think it was like a great way for me to visualize my parents' childhood and kind of think about, okay, I am here now because of that experience, and I don't know, I feel kind of thankful for it. Just because, like, I think because since my parents were kids and they were told to assimilate or like hide, so when I was born, it was always implanted in me that I will one day have to leave Indonesia to find a better place. So that was just how I was brought up. So I guess, yeah, I mean, I haven't watched The Look of Silence just because I don't know if I can deal with it right now. I'll watch it maybe in like 10 years when things are more secured in my life, and then I wouldn't have that much pressure to watch it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and just a quick summary for people who potentially haven't seen either of those films. They're two documentaries made essentially, following some people who were, either participants in or had families killed in, like you were mentioning, some of the political conflict and violence in Indonesia in the 60s. And there were, various paramilitary groups involved. And like you were mentioning, some, persecution of communists and other ethnic groups, and, some sort of like various cultural battles going on. And it's kind of an interesting documentary that sort of threads together, bringing some of those people together and actually having them, recreate some of the scenes from the 60s in like a play. And it's this really bizarre combination of like being extremely dark, very funny, humanizing participants in genocide, connecting them to the some of the families of victims and all that. So it's a very emotionally intense experience, for someone who is not involved at all. So yeah, for someone like yourself, where it's like, okay, your family is actually, you have much closer ties to that. Let's say.
I mean, the last time I checked, it was banned in Indonesia. Like, it made such a big roar when it came out, and like my parents heard of it and they knew it was banned there. But when I ask more questions, they just say, it's banned. But I think it's free on YouTube, like without the English translation, so that people from Indonesia could watch it. But I don't know. But that's just like the backdrop of my childhood, like governments and bureaucracy. But I think what was kind of awesome when I watched that documentary is just seeing how these people could just be so happy and didn't find themselves like remorseful or anything. They could go on with their lives and like be with all convictions, living their lives to the fullest, when I don't know, a generation of people just live in fear. So for me, being able to reflect that, oh, look at these assholes, like they were having the ball of their lives, like the least I could do for myself is, not be too depressed about life. Yeah. But I don't know, but that's just like, I mean, that was just that was the journey that I took with it.
Yeah, sure. And you mentioned that you felt like you sort of had a drive to leave Indonesia from a young age. Is that something that you were like, okay, I need to go to America and strut down Times Square and wear an I Heart New York shirt, or what's the deal there?
I mean, like when I was 9, shit kind of hit the fan again. Like, so when I was 9, we had to run away from Indonesia because of economic collapse, and still, that just made people angry. And the easiest way to express their anger is to put it on the Chinese ethnic group. And, even at that time, it was 98. Chinese ethnic group is still like not a full citizen. Like I have a special ID because I'm Chinese Indonesian, like in the back of my birth certificate, to indicate that, like the government need to track me because I don't know. But basically we had to run away. We ran away to Malaysia to my relatives who was there at the time. So basically my family, my aunt's families, my other aunt's families, we were just like technically quarantined in like our relative's place in Malaysia for a month because people just started, looting Chinese homes, Chinese businesses, rape, and, violence and all that stuff. So when we ran away, my mom kind of like told me if things were to get worse in Indonesia, she would set me up in Malaysia to go to school there and then just figure out a way for me to live there. Or if things were to get better in Indonesia, then she would want me to finish high school and then send me away. I don't know. I grew up watching a lot of movies, and a lot of movies were Hollywood movies. So in some sense, it was always just like a culture like that I have an idea about because, all of these movies were American movies talking about America, the American way of life, American culture. So I don't know. It just made sense that I want to aim there. And I was really driven with the idea of wanting to create a world of my own. I wanted to be able to learn how to make movies. So my pick was to go to America, and
The home of movies.
yeah, that was crazy. Now that I think about it, like I only applied to one school when I was in high school, and I applied to this school in California, Cal State Fullerton, thinking that all America looks like New York. Just because I would watch Friends. I think, like all America looks the same. So when I applied to Cal State Fullerton, I thought, Fullerton, Orange County, it's just like a version of New York. But when I got there, it was just kind of shocking, But yeah, so I guess it was just always that grain being implanted in me that, okay, you're going to leave Indonesia, and then because I have a sense of, I don't know, connection to the American culture, I just, that's where I shoot. And when I got into Cal State Fullerton, that's what I pursued.
So you thought that America was going to be like Friends, and you were sorely disappointed that it's not just a bunch of attractive people like bursting into each other's apartments unannounced all the time?
I know. I mean, it was kind of like a blind side, but like I was also just like an 18-year-old, didn't know much. Like, I don't know. When I first moved to America, my mom came with me, and she stayed for about 3.5 weeks just to get me set up, and then I don't know, and then she said goodbye. It was so crazy. Like I moved here, like I didn't know where to stay, but like we just had like a friend, and I was staying with them for about a week as they help us figure out a place to rent. But like, damn, I mean just thinking about the inconvenience of starting over is just like, fuck. I was so brave, it feels like, to a new country. Like English is not even my first language, but I don't know, that kind of like I guess shows my ambition, but also my naiveness.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, when you actually came to America, I mean, and since then, what are some unexpected ways that America and Indonesia differ, other than America not just being, just like Friends or Seinfeld or whatever?
Oh, I mean, of course, there are so many differences, but I don't know, the food, the way that you live your life, the choices that are made available to you, the sense of freedom that it allows, um, I mean, it's a very confusing question in a sense, but also like the way that I lived it was that America was my ticket out from Indonesia. And I guess, like in for a kid who had been conditioned to be all prepared to leave and to start a life in a different place, I feel like, I don't know, America was just like a great promise for a life that I could call my own in a sense. Um, but all of it, of course, stems from the experience of having to run away from Indonesia, but also being queer and being outspoken in a sense, or I just want to find out about things, I just want to learn and study. And I feel like in Indonesia, that's limited. Like, you know, I mean, I respect the culture there and how things are, but for instance, like in Indonesia, no matter what, you have to declare religion. And my parents are Buddhist, but I was raised by a Muslim woman, a live-in nanny that stayed with my family for like 26 years. And Indonesia is the most populated country with Muslim citizens in the world. So just that friction of, how to live, essentially, all these philosophies about life, all the outlook and mindset about living, it was just too confusing to me. Like, not only did I feel like I have to choose and side, I was also asked to kind of alienate certain things. And it was confusing because, I mean, it's really stupid, but like when I was in school in Indonesia, I was a kid, but essentially my teacher in religion class in studying Christianity basically kind of says that my parents and my family are not going to be saved because they worship different gods and different idols. And, as a confused kid, I don't know, I went back and forth from buying it into fighting it. And I remember when we had a pray with my family, I would kind of like joke about it because I fear if I pray a different way than how it's being told at school, I would go to hell. It was just very confusing. And I feel like being able to ask questions about it, being able to learn about it is what I want to do in life. And I feel like America was one way out from that place that allowed me to learn and study about it. Just because, I don't know, things just get really confusing with all of the limitations and stuff. And of course, in the persecutions in the 60s, free thinkers, artists, people who can reflect what communism is and all of that power struggles, those are the people that were persecuted. And at the time, communism was just like a party with no power in Indonesia, but as an act of, I don't know, like power from that government, let's just kill all of these communists just to show who's in charge, So I don't know. I was just always conditioned with that kind of mindset, and I wanted to be able to learn about it and kind of reflect on where I fit in. And I don't know. And America is one place that I could be free into figuring it all out and exploring those ideas while also challenging it. Because in Indonesia, if you talk shit about any of the president or anybody in the government, you're gonna get kicked. And if you go and challenge the social norm or the modest norm of presenting yourself and your identity, you're gonna get kicked. And if you're a woman and you wanna be free in expressing yourself, you're gonna get limited because just the norms of governing how a person, a human, express themselves is just not as free as America. So it sounds like I'm talking shit about Indonesia, but of course, America has a lot of its own shit as well. So it just makes sense for me to be in America by design or by choice.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so let me ask you this about the dynamics in Indonesia, because it sounds like there's sort of a combination of tensions between different, religious groups or ethnic groups, as well as sort of like a repressive, top-down way of saying, hey, listen, like this is the way we want you to be, and we're going to sort of like make you feel bad if you're not within the, the parameters sort of laid out by the state. Is that a somewhat accurate way of framing it?
Yeah, and I just feel very privileged that I was able to live away from Indonesia and then come back and reflect. But growing up, in December, as it gets closer to Christmas, you start seeing churches being guarded by police because bombs were everywhere. And I can't believe that was just the norm, as December comes in, okay, the traffic is just going to be a little bit bad, and we just dealt with it. And same thing, like when Chinese culture was still repressed, like we would celebrate Chinese New Year kind of in hiding, like, okay, close your door and then we're gonna celebrate Chinese New Year. But when I was living in that condition, we just made the best out of what we got. And I feel so lucky that I was able to go out and kind of reflect on why there are all of these limitations, why there are all of these injustices. And then I I don't know. This always like creates such a big problem between me and my dad, because we would always just fight about it, just because like he doesn't, I don't know, he just doesn't see my point. Because I think, as a millennial, as a person who grew up on the internet and being able to access knowledge beyond just what is being passed down or what is being read, I always present opposition to him, and we would just end up we just ended up resenting each other, just because like what I am able to think about is just way beyond his comprehension, to a point where he was just like, what are you doing? The way that he sees it is just me defying his power as a father. And that's a bad thing in Asian culture. And it took me years and years and years to understand why we would always butt head. And I remember after the 2016 election, I was just like, fuck this place. I'm going to leave America for a little bit. I'm going to stay in Indonesia just to figure out, like what is there to life. And when I was there, there was this similar incident that really kind of like made me, I don't know, reflect on everything again. Basically, at that time, the governor of Jakarta, the capital city, the governor at that time was the first ever governor in history that was a minority. He was Chinese Indonesian, and he was also Christian. And somebody, take a recording of his speech and re-edit it to make it sound like he was talking shit about Islam. And of course, it was proven that it was like a misleading edit. It was proven, it was taken to court. But of course, he still, ate the dust, because at that point, he was put in jail because he had created such an upset, although it was not his doing. But he was taken into prison because he was, essentially being blasphemous. But like, as a son talking to my father, I told him, like, how could people do shit like this? He was not guilty from the beginning, and he still is not guilty. But how could a place, a country, a government, people with power still, like, persecute him? It was, and then, we just ended up fighting. And then that's when I knew, okay, I cannot live with my parents. I cannot see them more than like once a year. Just because like, I, at the time, I didn't have the vocabulary or the insight to be able to connect with my father. But now, after COVID and everything, it kind of makes sense to me. I can be more compassionate towards my father, knowing that he grew up in a survival mode where he just had to look out for himself, and he did his best to, like, look out for me. And, maybe he was sparing me from disappointment of being oppressed, that the best thing to do is to not question or to push back. And that just made us, like, fight all the time.
Yeah, so without trying to unravel the interpersonal dynamics too much of your family arguments, I am curious. So it sounds like, you sort of saw the whatever dynamics between the ruling party and some of the more oppressed minority groups in the country, and felt that was a great injustice, and were speaking out against that. And your father, who's, a member of one of these repressed ethnic groups, was sort of like, why are you making a scene? Like, it's fine. It's good enough. Just keep your head down and, do your stuff. is that kind of the dynamic at play?
Yeah. And of course, like, just being a son and a father, like, and then also, maybe I just have a bigger capacity in reflecting what I see that my father is blinded by, for his own survival. And then when I bring it up, it's just seen as opposition towards him.
Interesting. Yeah. It's not taken in the context of like, oh, let's have an abstract discussion about the dynamics of, ethnic relations in Indonesia. It's like, my son, Leonard, the Leo, is defying me.
But I think that's also just like how the culture is.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to speak about like an Asian culture in general, but in my background with my cousins, with my aunts and everything, we just don't have conversations with our parents like this. We just don't have that open discussion of, oh, tell me about when the time you had to run away from Indonesia for a month. Like, how did you manage your finances? Or how did you make sure that we have food to eat and all that stuff? We just don't talk about it. And I think that's why I just found myself wanting to be able to express myself. And art is just like the medium that made sense to me, because so many times when I try to speak with words, I feel like I got slapped in the face, that I just learned how to be better. Like, I'm going to infiltrate in different ways. So I think that's how I found myself really sticking to it with art making.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And then just a point of clarification for my knowledge. So Indonesia is like an archipelago of a bunch of islands. It's actually funny. I was looking at Southeast Asian geography on Google Maps like a week ago, like totally independent, even before I asked you if you wanted to do this podcast. I don't remember what the situation was, but I got confused. I was like, all right, hold on a second here, right? Because it's a little bit confusing. Like, where's Malaysia? Where's Indonesia? Where are the Philippines? What's going on with Papua New Guinea? Like, what's the deal with this stuff? So I was sort of looking at all these different places and trying to figure out what's going on. And I am curious, if you think about America, ethnic groups are pretty broadly distributed, right? That you can sort of say, hey, listen, like you can trace certain migrations and there's obviously pockets of different types of people, but you generally expect to find a blend of ethnic groups pretty much throughout, most major urban environments and states. And I'm curious if that's similar in Indonesia, if it's like, hey, listen, like Java is mostly these people, Sumatra is mostly these people, Timor is these people. Like what is the actual dynamic like?
I mean, I think in my case, like my family, my background, my great, it's just complicated in a sense because essentially it all comes down because our skin tone is just different than the native Indonesians. So Indonesia comprises of so many different cultures, different ethnic groups even, and it's not like America where America is one big solid land, and then we have Alaska and Hawaii. Indonesia is just spread out. So not all places are connected by land. And in those different places, of course, different cultures, different people, different animals, different plants just live and inhabit those places. But for my case, we were always looked at as an incoming people because Chinese people came and sailed to Indonesia and settled before Indonesia was independent in the 20s. And that's when my grandfather, from my father's side, moved to Indonesia. He sailed with his father to flee communism in search for a better life, and then he settled in Indonesia. So, all of these friction, when it all comes down to the fact that they see Chinese ethnic group as not the native people of the land, that all of hatred just had to go towards the Chinese people, not even the Dutch, who was there for 350 years and, living their life. But I don't know. But that, I guess that what makes it kind of different than America, that, yeah, we were just always seen as like an incoming threat. So when there was an economic collapse, they saw that ethnic Chinese group were thriving. They were not happy with it because there's still a lot of, poor places in Indonesia that, yeah, it was just easier to set the target and then deal with it. But also, after I've moved to Chicago, when, all of these DNA testing kits became like accessible at home, I just tested it out. And I found out that like I'm not 99% Chinese. I thought I was like I thought my 23 and me would say, okay, Leonard, you're 99% Chinese with 1% unassigned DNA.
Neanderthal.
Which I apparently have more Neanderthal genes than most of the people. I don't know. So stupid. I mean, that's what my 23 and me says. But it turned out that like I'm not like full Chinese. And I brought it up to my mom and my my aunts in our like WhatsApp chat group was like, hey, I got this back and I'm confused why I'm not 99% Chinese. And turns out like my great grandfather from my mom's side was native Indonesian, but we just never talked about it, which was so funny. So like my cultural background is Chinese because we were raised with those ideals, those philosophies, the way we pray, the way we eat, the food we choose, the decorations that we put at home. But it was just shocking to find out, okay, I'm clearly not full just Chinese, but why people were still like chasing me out. So like, I don't know, live and let learn. Just like, what can I do? You know, like I can just take the data and make it support me in different ways, and I just try not to like overthink it too much.
Yeah, totally. So I sort of allowed this first part of this conversation to be, you know, Leonard's dissertation on ethnic relations on Indonesia, which I'm endlessly fascinated by. But, you know, the art making that you started to touch on, I mean, that's sort of the main reason that I wanted to have this conversation. And so you actually mentioned something I think is pretty funny, right? Is that, you know, you've had some challenges with your dad, and that your, you know, cultural and family upbringing potentially don't involve a lot of discussing issues, but simultaneously you get your dad to do pretty outrageous things in photographs that, you know, probably have some semblance of these issues, you know, maybe not explicitly addressed, but at least partially addressed through your art making. Is that, you know, a subconscious or conscious power play to get him to perform in your, you know, exploration of all of these issues, or is there something else going on?
Of course, maybe it started out like subconsciously, but then as I realized the power that came with it, of course I'm gonna keep like pushing. Like I learned such a great lesson in my undergrad. You know, like I moved to America. I turned 18 on the plane. You know, like I turned 18 on the plane flying to America. Like,
did they bring you like a cupcake with a candle in it? You can't have any flames on airplanes for sure. So there's definitely no candle.
It was like I didn't care about it, but like,
did they bring you a bag of peanuts? What did they do? Anything?
No, they just gave us like headphones and like just enjoy.
And a blanket in a bag.
Like, oh my God. Yeah. But I remember as I grew older, apart from my parents, I started growing like facial hair, just because, you know, like when I was living with my parents, like these just don't grow, you know. So after I moved to America, I started like growing facial hair, and my parents always like make such a big deal out of it. It's just like, oh, it was relentless. Even my aunt would like tell me that I'm defying my parents. I'm being like an ungrateful kid because I don't shave my face. And, you know, first of all, like I'm just like kind of lazy. Like I don't want to like shave my face every day, but just seeing how much pushback that I got from my family, I just want to like challenge it. So I shaved all of my facial hair. I shaved all of my hair. And then I shave my eyebrows, and then I make a photo out of it, and then I send it to them. Oh, they just didn't know how to respond. Like, they just didn't know how to respond because, like, I'm not defying them, but I'm not, you know, like, glorifying their request. But I told them, like, okay, you're a Buddhist, you know, like, the highest form of being is to be a monk towards, you know, that's what you always taught me. So here I am presenting myself looking like a monk with no hair whatsoever. They just didn't know what to respond. And after I did it, never once they make a big deal of like how my face is looking or how long my hair is. And I learn, okay, I have power now. I can protest without causing so much heartache towards my parents. And after time has passed, we can reflect and laugh about it. And I feel like, whoa, this way of protesting, this way of pushing back is actually so liberating, but also taking into account of where I come from. So when it comes to like making photos with my family, of course I'm gonna push it. Like, oh my gosh, I remember like my sister. She's just always so sassy and cranky. We grew up always fighting and shit. But after I got sent to America, she got sent to Australia because that was her direction. She didn't pick a school in America. She wanted to be closer to home, and Australia was where she ended up. So usually during Christmas break, that's when I got to see her and my family. And I remember, I think I was like 21 at the time, and that was like her first time coming back to Indonesia after being away from home. I don't know. I recognize, I guess, the struggles that I had gone through. She was just comparing herself so much with like white women. And, you know, she was just like, oh, I wish my nose is like this, my face is like this. And she was just timid and she didn't want to post in my photos. And just like, of course, being the older brother, but also wanting to like push back on that perspective that she has on herself, I told her, okay, how about you post in my photo, but we can cover your face? And she agrees to it. But at that time, I didn't know what to cover her face with, you know? And then I ended up seeing chicken skin going on sale in the supermarket. And I was like, whoa, I can get a lot of chicken skin for cheap. And then it clicks in my head, okay, I'm going to cover her face with chicken skin.
It's great. That's what she was like, great, I'm Hannibal Lecter. I'm into it.
Oh my God. I mean, she wanted a handbag in exchange for that, but she told me only after I've made money that she would like ask for the Hermes handbag. But yeah, I feel like I think now for me, like art making is just part of the way that I go about in my life, like go about in my world, because like that's one way that I communicate, that like the return is just so fulfilling, that it's just so fulfilling. It just makes me, you know, like makes me content with being alive. It's like, it's more fulfilling than shouting at someone and directing my anger at them. To me, like being able to process all of those, say, negative information and then kind of turning it into something that I have power over, and then on top of it, making it beautiful, is just like, oh, this is just so fulfilling than just like yelling at someone or like having an extended argument with someone. And I don't know, that to me, like art making is just, it's just the way that I perceive living, in a sense, which also allows me time and patience. Yeah, and I guess I say that because, you know, different people use photography in different ways. I prefer using a film camera where I can't see the result right away, where my subjects can't see the result right away. And once the camera is set up on a tripod, it just stays there because it's not like easy and light and spontaneous. And that is like my preferred way of working. But for, you know, other photographers, they prefer the fast and the immediate, and that's how they perceive their life. But for me, being able to take time and reflect and be patient and just ground myself in that experience of making the photo, the return that I get from it is just so fulfilling that I don't want to stop.
So it sounds like there's because something that I think is interesting is the role of humor in all of your work, and it sounds like that's potentially like a key part of a lot of this creative process, right? Is this combination of a little bit of argumentativeness and sort of pushing things to the extreme and finding humor in it, and then turning that into an actual piece. Is that something that you do consciously, or does that just kind of happen?
I think it kind of. I think in the beginning I didn't. I don't know. Maybe it's just my personality, to be honest. Like, I don't know. Like, I can be thinking about the worst things in life. For example, like the earlier work that I made, I would always like be in so much fear that this was the last time that I would be able to, be in Indonesia and hang out with my family and make photos with them. I was just so enveloped in fear, but still the result of the photos I made at that time still reflect a sense of playfulness. Because I don't know if I were so, I guess, down and sad. When I go to work, I don't want to be sad. I want to do something to make me feel better. So I guess like unconsciously that kind of led me into making decisions that were fun and hospitable towards myself. That nowadays, like, I guess that just becomes part of my visual language. like my secret sauce, I guess, in making artwork, because it would just not feel the same, because so much of my personality is like the way that I can push back using humor, that without it just feels not me.
Yeah. What does it feel like when you get an idea that is going to work well in a photo?
Like I would, like, usually my process, I would prepare and I would plan. So I would make a list of things, kind of like what we did in our photo. Like, I would tell you, okay, if you can help me bring all of these materials, those are going to be the materials that we would use in the photographs. And then once I get in the space with you and look at all of these materials and then try to figure out what we could do, I kind of think of it as an improvisation at that point, because at that point I can't just like pursue what I planned, because at that point I can just make the best out of what I have and try to make it make sense. So I would say like my process is usually like a lot of pre-planning, but once I get to the space, or once I get to the working situation, I try to improvise. And yeah, so then I learn to not get fixated on what I plan, because I don't know, like it would just be more of a disappointment when I don't live up towards my expectations. So that when I plan, I just learn to not, set that fixation on that. I don't know. It sounds funny to explain, because I just learned to not get fixated on a single commitment in my head. I always approach it as like, okay, I'm going to do as much as I can to pre-plan, but then once we get to the situation where I have to deal with you as a subject and deal with all of these props, I will honor our time together and make the best out of what we could do. Yeah.
So it's an interesting combination of being detail oriented and planning excessively, and then being willing to just totally scrap it based upon what's actually happening in a given scene or whatever.
Yeah, because like at the very bottom of it, like I am confident with my knowledge in photography. Like I know what ugly lighting looks like, and I will always have control over that. Like, I know not to like let you ugly. So then, in some sense, it was just like a training to become confident in myself that, okay, don't worry too much about all of these like fleeting elements, because at the very end of it, I feel confident in my ability to light a good photograph that should help me feel better and not so stressed. you know
So I know very little about photography and never take pictures. But if I were to say, okay, what are the types of skills necessary for photography? I would clump it into three categories, right? One would be having an idea for an image. One would be actually composing the image, right? Like the sort of, not exactly technical details, but the artist's eye for where things should be. And then the other would be the more technical skill of lighting, angles, all that kind of stuff. What would you change or add to that model?
Oh, photography is like a drawing of light. And to be a great photographer, you need to know what the light is doing. You have to have that kind of intimate knowledge of how light reflects and how that kind of accentuate or confuses the viewing experience. And to me, I feel like, I guess, to kind of hone all of the things that we talked earlier, I think my experiences being on the lookout for myself and being able to perceive and be suspicious of my surrounding got me really good at looking at light. Like, and I don't know, like, I feel like the way that I work with the film, I choose the film that is 100 ISO. Basically, it's the most sensitive one. So basically, it like 100 ISO is used with the sunlight. When the light is just so bright, that's when you use that kind of film. And I use it in my work so that I have the utmost control of the lights. Because if the light is not bright enough, it won't be rendered in the film. So I think the combination of working with the 100 ISO and being vigilant in a sense, or being so ambitious with the way that I want to be able to light and create a great exposure, like, I just want to get better at it. And like, basically nowadays, the way that I scale my work, sometimes it just depends on what equipment is available to me. If I only have, like, say 1 hour to do a shoot and I only have sunlight, I can figure out if I have reflector or something. So whatever can allow me to bend the light or reflect back. So in a sense, like, I don't know, like, photography is all about light, like, somebody, I don't know, I mean, the best way to explain it is, I guess, when people put on makeup, they try to mimic the way the most prettiest light falls on their face. So that's why their shadow would blend down, not up, just because, like, the best light that I could cast on you would be, the pretty light from above, but also soft, preferably like 45 degrees, so it lights the middle part of your face, like your nose, your eyes. Because if it's just right above you, like your eyebrows, your nose, your lips would cast like a harsh shadows that makes you look a certain way.
But what if you shave your eyebrows off?
I mean, still the same. You got bones right here, like. So in a sense, just like, yes, all of those three things that you mentioned about the concept of the photo, the equipment, the form of the photography, but also the way that each photographer perceive light and translate that into a photograph is different. And for me, being, I guess, the funny personality that I am, that's also the way that I want to play with my light. And that's how I play with the color that I put in my work, the poses that I put in my work, but also the patterns that I put in my work.
Yeah, and do you, so it sounds like most of your focus in terms of developing your own, let's say, capacity and artistic vision is on the light and, you know, sort of your ability to perceive that and set it up properly. Do you like practice? Do you like do drills? Like what does one do?
I mean, at this point, I'm a professional, Todd. Like, I have a degree in photography, but I also have a degree in theater, you know? So, you know, like earlier when I said I moved to California to learn movie making, I ended up being in a theater program because at the time I thought, theater program, oh, I go to a theater to watch movies, so it would only make sense if I go to theater school to learn how to make movies. But, you know, apparently I was wrong. But what I got out of that experience is like I learned about the stage, but also how to light a stage, how to set up a stage. And when I got good at photography, it just becomes like my tools to like effectively do something great. So I guess I just do it by, you know, trials and errors and try to do more and more. And like the greatest thing about using film is that like it costs money to take a photo. So if you do a light setup once and it looks ugly, I will learn to not do it again because it had just cost me some money to make an ugly photo. So, you know, all of those things considered, that's how I practiced. Yeah. And yeah. But no, I don't usually have like an idea. I don't have like a drawing that I do before I go shoot because I don't know what the final composition is. So I just go by my trust and believe in myself when I set up the lights.
Yeah, but it sounds like you potentially partially developed your skill by having a clear vision of what you want, and then, you know, you get your output, and then over time, you know, you're able to make those two closer and closer, and that's indicative of getting better, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, because, you know, with something like photography, it's not like you can sit and do scales on a guitar and be like, all right, I'm practicing guitar right now, right? Like, I mean, maybe you are at home like, all right, I'm going to find, you know, 49 different textile patterns and, you know, set up the light with them. I mean, do you do that?
No.
Okay.
I mean, but I think that's like the greatest thing about being an artist. Like, if I want to collect trash, which I did over the quarantine.
Yeah. And
I was just too lazy and it just piled up. And then like once it piled up, they start to look like, oh, this starts to look like something. Yeah. You know, then I was just like, okay, maybe there's a reason why I was so lazy and didn't want to throw them out. Then I had just to figure out, okay, what can I do with them? And I think that's like the freedom of being an artist. And like photography is just such a liberating medium that I can make some mess or create or collect trash or like do some ugly painting and then just put it as a backdrop, or I can like stitch something together and still be able to like honor it in some ways, you know? And I feel like that sense of freedom and playfulness is what I do with photography and art making. Yeah, but I don't like practice. But like I would just make something and then I would just try to make the best out of it. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, that's so interesting. So you mentioned it briefly, but we recently did a bunch of photographs at South Loop Strength and Conditioning for a New York Times piece, and you did some other photographs in Chicago at 13th Flow and some stuff outside. What was the deal with that? Can you give just like a brief commentary on that piece? It was a lot of fun being part of it. You know, I got to live some of the things that we're talking about, where we had a bunch of shit and we, threw it together and stood there, and we had, I think, maybe 3 attempts to get it right. So it was a lot of fun. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I guess I got approached because of the work that I was making in quarantine. Basically, like, what else could I do in this small space? And I just started making photos at home, and I got approached, and I was asked to kind of propose a project that I wanted to do. And I told Eve, the editor, like, I cannot make more photos at home right now because Chicago just reopened. It would just feel like a punishment to like lock myself up even more and try to make like photos at home. So, I proposed what would make sense at the time. Chicago just reopened. I miss the gym so much. And if I were to risk my life being surrounded by other people, I want to take the risk of surrounding myself with people at the gym, because I would go there every day anyway. So it's just like, that was the risk that I was willing to take. And, at that time, I was already also reflecting a lot on like health and fitness, that was something that I wanted to pursue. So I proposed it. I was like, oh, how about if I make photos with my friends from the gym and whatever else we could conjure up? And that got approved, and I pursued it. And yeah, that was the beginning of it. But the way that I put together the work, I always, my work is really like in a sense, a cultural or like a human exchange between me as a photographer and my subjects. And I had to first ask who would be willing to be in the photographs. And then after that, I had to figure out, okay, then after I know these are the people that would be willing to be in the photograph, how are we going to make the photograph? Like, what are we going to make a photograph of? And I don't know. At that point, it was just a matter of like solving a problem. Like with the photo I made with you, there were 9 people, and I just want to make sure everybody is like 6 feet away except for partners or close friends. And how do I communicate that and also like challenge it? So in my mind, I challenge it by telling all of you to put your phones in your shoes and post your phones in a very close, intimate distance with one another as a way to show the push and pull, And I guess to me that made the photograph. Everything else is just like background. To me, when I look at that photograph, I think of the phones and the shoes and everybody else. I don't know.
That's
like
funny.
how do you, when you look at that photo, like what stands out to you?
That's fascinating, right? Because to me, that's like a subtle detail that I think would actually be probably easy to miss in it, because there's just kind of a lot going on in it. And for people listening, we'll link to this stuff in the show notes as well, so you can take a look at it. But you mentioned potentially like a parade as like a model for that particular photograph, and that's sort of what stands out to me, right? It looks very processional and actually reminds me of sort of like holiday imagery, right? Where it's like, oh, okay, yeah, there's the sort of like marching band on Christmas with like angels floating nearby, and like because I think that's sort of common across a lot of your work, right? And a lot of religious imagery. There's just like a lot of stuff going on. There's like, okay, here's the sort of main thing, and then here's like 15 other symbols for your viewing pleasure, just sort of like all stacked around it. And so yeah, that's kind of what stands out to me. It seems very parade like. It has a little bit of like a, from my background, like the setups that we would do for Christmas decorations with like a marching band and like just a lot of stuff around it,
Yeah. And honestly, all of those elements are transverse. Asian people can look at it and they can look at it as like a celebration. Same way, I mean, I'm glad I hear you're looking at it and it's reminding you of Christmas. But to me now, like, I think after COVID, I feel like, okay, the world is already so hard. I just want to be happy and celebrate. I don't have to try so hard in making it about sadness anymore, because that's already the context that we're in right now. So whatever I can do to make it fun and humorous, that's what I want to do. But also, like, as a photographer, I don't want to make you look bad, like I want to make my people look good, because if my people look ugly, it will just reflect me. It would just reflect that I'm not good at taking photos of people, and that's not what I want to do, So in a sense, knowing that I just want to make celebration happen with the ingredients that you help me provide and set up, and knowing that Zamboni looking thing is available at the gym, and I'm it's basically like honoring what is there, what is available for me to use, and what you brought to the shoot that we can use to build together that world that we share. And that's really like how I make my work, in a sense. So like when I go to Jean's house, when she showed me all of the Clorox, I'm like, of course, the Clorox needs to take center stage. That's why when you look at the photo, like the Clorox literally is in the middle of the frame. But of course, Clorox itself is not the photograph, but it just communicates the time that we're in, but also the specificity of what Jean has at her home at this time, which communicates about what life we're in right now.
Yeah, absolutely. That there's sort of like symbols and iconography around us all the time that we can easily take for granted, right? I mean, you mentioned at the gym, the Zamboni thing you're talking about, it's like this big green floor cleaner that we use. And, it sort of sits in this hallway in the back and kind of smells bad, and you don't necessarily think about it that much. But, if you were to see that thing and you'd ever used it or been around when it's being used, it immediately is like, oh, this is of this particular space, right? So yeah, I definitely think that you have whatever a unique capacity to recognize those things as like, hey, this is super indicative of this broader environment, and you may not even recognize how much it creates that entire story just by seeing it in certain contexts.
Yeah. So basically when I said like everything else becomes just about like solving a problem to me, like, so okay, if I want to take a photograph of the Zamboni, who can I post behind it? Because I don't want to put the interns behind it, because that would just be rude, like, and also it wouldn't make sense if I put like a member behind it. So it would, I don't know. It just makes sense. Okay, Todd, you need to be behind it.
It should have been Ian. Ian loves the Zamboni.
I know, but that's an insult to Ian. Like there's so much more to Ian than just cleaning the gym, Todd. So like I'm not going to make a photograph of Ian being like essentially the gym cleaner for the New York Times. That's just sad.
I guess that's fair. But yeah, the good old Jim Zamboni. So question for you that I think is super interesting is that you're an artist who's also very into fitness, right? And there can potentially be some conflict there. I know for me, I wasn't into fitness growing up per se, but I played soccer, but I was mostly if you ask me my identity, right, it would be someone who was into music and someone who was into like math and science, right? And then also doing something that was somewhat physical was at odds with that, right? You're like, you're a nerd, or like you're a music person. Like you shouldn't also care about like lifting weights or trying hard at sports. Do you experience any of that conflict?
Yeah, I mean, growing up, I was a bit like chubby, like, and of course that was like a big point of contention between me and my father, because my dad was always active, and he got so many trophies for playing badminton and squash because he was so good at it.
Oh, interesting. I assumed that those were swimming trophies because isn't he wearing goggles in one of the photographs?
Yes, the reason why I put him in his swimming.
You fooled me.
Because I want to take a photograph of his trophy as his dick. And the closest that I could get him to be as revealing is to be in swimming, like attire. Because I won't make him like nude, but yeah. But I also grew up swimming. But basically, like I was a fat kid. And being the adult that I am, I could look back and say, yeah, like this kid, went through all of this shit. Just give him like food to eat and then just leave him alone. But of course, my father wouldn't leave me alone. He would make fun of me for it. But I guess that sort of like got me into fitness. But I had always been like active. Like I would play badminton. I did karate growing up. I played tennis. And like, but I just, to me, fitness was so much about molding an image of myself that would be acceptable, I guess, to my dad. But at the same time, it just was just so confusing because of, I don't know, his lack of compassion, but also his lack of knowledge. Like, he wasn't a nutritionist. He was just like a dad. So when he saw me eating too much, he'll just tell me to stop eating because I would look fatter. Like, so just the things that he tried to enforce in my life, all of the positive things that he wanted to instill in me, he just didn't know the best way to communicate it, that it just ended up being like traumatic for me as a kid. But I guess, I don't know, like, so fitness and health had always been like something that I pursued. And I don't know, a lot of it had to do with like, okay, how would I fit in? I remember, like when I first got to California, like, when I first got to California, I was considered, okay, you were a bit big for my Asian peers. When I was in Indonesia, I'm 5'10". So like when I was in high school, I was like one of the biggest people in the class because I was 5'10" and I had started working out. So I was just like a bit more packed. But when I got to California, I was like the smallest one, just like paying attention to that. How did I go from being the big person into the small person, and then realizing the different cultures? That's when I started like, okay, in California, the look is not skinny padded. I needed more muscle mass to get along with the program here. So that's what I learned, but also it stems from the desire of being accepted. And I think now, as an older me and as a person who has done a lot with photography, what is great about doing photography is that I get to test out all of these illusions about myself, or these illusions about being a human, a person, that it allows me, okay, if I say wear this outfit, this is what it looks like. If I push my stomach, if I lean closer to the camera and make my butt look bigger, all of these tricks, like I master all of those tricks and I could learn, okay, these are just part of the gift of seeing, and being able to, to have power over all of that is just so liberating that it kind of helps me, I guess, find myself. So I don't know, after COVID, I think I just learned so much more about art making and fitness, because essentially what I want to do in my life is I want to be able to keep making art. And to keep making art, I need to have the stamina to catch up. I don't need to be the strongest person. I don't need to be the fastest person. I just need to be able to get the job done. And I guess that really like taught me so much about training. I guess because like I told you, like before COVID and all that shit, like I thought to myself, like, hitting failure is like, that's when I know I have done my job at the gym, because I give it all. But also now I reflect back on it, it's also just me being, low self-esteem and like not trusting myself. I was just misinformed. But yeah, I guess, like, to answer your question, my ultimate dream in life is to like be able to keep making art and keep going to the gym, because this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do. So basically, I'm, like, I don't want to be like my father, who retire and then just ended up like quarreling with my mom at home because he just has too much time at home now suddenly. Or I don't want to have like a midlife crisis, So to me, the COVID really allows me to reflect on what I want to do with my life, and this is exactly what I'll do when in 20 years, I will keep going to the gym, and I want to keep making art, and then everything else will just fit in the middle somehow.
That actually sounds like a pretty excellent philosophy, right? To have two things that can just be sort of an endless process that you just show up for and are, maybe not always totally pleasurable, but it's like, cool. Yeah. You just like, you do these activities and you get fulfillment from it. That's wise words from Leonard.
I mean, like, because it feels like in the beginning, it felt like I was at war with myself every time I go to train. So like, I was literally at war, not even training anymore. I was just like, I don't know. I was like hate fucking myself. And now I think with all of these realization, I can feel more grounded in a sense, because like if the goal is to be able to keep doing this in 20 years, I want to enjoy it. So I want to get good at it, because if I have to do it again and again and again, I want to be really good at it and have good forms doing it. So that's really how it helped me shift my focus on, like just being responsible and compassionate with my body, instead of just like going to failure every time,
Yeah, I think that's super interesting and insightful. So So you said hate fucking yourself, right? Was that, were you attempting to sort of like punish yourself, or was it more that you felt like in order to maximize your specific results from a training session, you had to push as hard as possible, or maybe a combination of the two, or something else?
Subconsciously, like being able to train that hard is like a power that I have over myself and my existence, that to me, being able to push myself that hard was like showing my power over myself, because that's what I needed to be reminded of when I was basically depressed. I wanted to know that, yeah, I have power over this bitch, and I'm gonna be able to push as hard as I want. And that makes me feel good, because it tells me, yes, you are the master of this bitch, but
This bitch being yourself.
being myself.
Yeah.
I guess that shows how I speak to myself and not so compassionate to myself. But yes, I at that time, in all of my depression and all of my sadness, being able to train really hard until I hit failure was the power that I wanted to see and carry through, because it tells me that I have power. But that was not right, because I just ended up with health issues. I I ended up with shingles and shit. I ended up having to get surgery. I don't know. I guess all of those are what helped me learn about fitness, and photography just eases me in being able to reflect it visually and test it out and kind of like become a point of reference. Okay, you were just too mean to yourself in your mind, Leonard. Now look at it in a real physical form and learn. I guess that's like when I told you that's just how I perceive my life. That's what I do with photography. I go back and forth between my brain and what is the real physical to help me separate fear and anxiety. Like just to be nicer to myself.
Yeah, interesting. And do you find that in this, I guess this is relatively new for you, right? Trying to be nicer to yourself. Is that easy? Does it come naturally now? You're just like, oh, this is a much better way to do this? Or do you still kind of have this instinct of like, yo, you really need to push yourself harder?
Yeah, it's still new, but like what I find out, usually when my glycogen level is low, that's when I'm just like really a bitch to myself. That's when like I feel less confident in myself. That's when I feel like I need to do more, when in reality, no, you need to eat. Or when my blood sugar is low, that's when like it feels like, okay, fight or flight, uncertainties. Okay, I need to get over this. But I know all of this now after COVID, because in a sense, like COVID really reset a lot of things. Because like I was in quarantine, I was trying to work out as hard as I could. I didn't really leave the house in the beginning of the quarantine because it's cold outside, but like I was still like fatigued. It turns out, I mean, now I can see what I did wrong. I basically was extending my workout to like 2.5 hours, like with lightweight, but going to failure. Because I thought in my head, like, if I'm not going to leave the house, I need something to do here. I enjoy working out. I'm gonna work out for 3 hours in a day. And at the time, I was also not eating like enough. Like now reflecting back on it, because in my head, like, okay, I'm not leaving the house. What's the point of eating too much? But then like, that's when I hit like rock bottom. And then I just became ravenous, and I lost control of my body, and my body just like went on autopilot, and then just like, no, you need to bake and eat all of this sugar and fat, because that's what will make me look that's what will make me feel good. Just because at that point I feel like my body is just like in a coup towards me, just because like, no, I had just went or a wrong path. But to me, that was just so insightful, because like, of course I read about it, I learned about it, but it just didn't connect, like, of course, like the coaches had told me like, you don't have to push that hard, because I don't know, but it just didn't click. And I'm just that kind of person where like I have to make sense of it in my own way and in my own experience for me to get it. So now I get it, because everything that happened, and COVID allowed me like a point of reflection where I reset and turn off all of the other variables. Yeah.
Do you have a similar impulse to push yourself that hard with making art as well?
Yeah, I guess so. Like, I don't want.
I guess you can't really push to failure in taking a photograph. It's not exactly the same.
I told you I don't want to waste money taking ugly photos. So whatever I can do to make sure nothing is ugly, like, why would I want to spend money and make things ugly? I mean, I don't know. That's like one way that I think about it, but it's also like it just becomes like, I guess, quality control in my line of profession. Like being self-critical and being self-flagellating is really great at like making sure your artwork is like up to par with your ambition. Because I don't know. I don't know, different artists have their own ways of like quality controlling their work, but I don't want to be just for myself. I don't want to be an artist where I make great work in the beginning of my career and then at the end of my career I just make ugly shit. Yeah.
It's a common problem for bands, right? They put out one or two good records and then they just lose it.
I mean, sure.
Yeah. How do you recognize when you're not being helpful in terms of how hard you're being on your own work versus when it is helpful to hold yourself to a higher standard?
I don't know. Like, I mean, I don't feel as much of that anymore in my work because, like I said, like I know how to light things to look good, that I don't think about it like that when I make work as a way to not be mean to myself. But like, I guess with training, like I now rely on like see my watch and my whoop just so that I have a data that is outside of myself for me to reflect on, because yeah, I can't rely on my feelings. Like also feeling good is not like a good metric for you to go on. That it's just better. That's why it's better to have like a discipline and consistency than trying to aim for perfection. So in my work, in my art making, I don't aim for perfection because being consistent is more important than making the best visual experience that I've ever made. So when I make work, I don't think that, okay, I have to make a better photo than the last one. I approach it in a way, okay, I have to be consistent in the way that I produce my work visually, but also in the planning of it, but also in the way that I light my work. So it kind of like eases the process so that I don't get stressed over reaching that intangible dream that I set out for myself.
Yeah, and like we mentioned earlier, you feel comfortable with a certain amount of improvisation that in some ways can take some of the pressure off, because it's like, okay, I'm going to work with what's available in this situation and we're going to see what actually comes of it.
Yeah, and I think that's also what I learned from, the health and nutrition, because prior to all of these realizations and enlightenment, I thought, I am a creative person. I want to do toast to bar today and also do my biceps after class. Or after doing a session, I also want to do sit-ups and more butt, more glutes exercises. Just all of it, because I thought, like it's more important to be creative in my approach, that I didn't aim for consistency. Really, like to grow, you need like progressive overload on your body, and to be able to progress, you need like a set things that you are trying to progress on. You're not just like, I don't know, like that's how I make sense of training and art making. Because when I make photo tomorrow, it's not going to be about, I'm going to find somebody who can hold their breath underwater for 3 minutes. I just learned not to aim there. So with training, it helps me now learning that, okay, if this is what I want to do in 20 years, I need to be able to sustain it, but I need to be able to be good at it because this is what I want to keep doing. And having a set discipline to help me fall back on when I feel insecure in my head, or when I feel like, okay, there's nothing really I can do today. I'm just feeling so blue, but guess what? You can go to the gym and go work out and not be so lost in my own head.
Yeah, that's super interesting that you mentioned the almost stereotypical artist type of conception of like, oh, I want to be super open to what's happening and just kind of like go with the flow and do whatever, and that may not always be the best option with training, that you probably want to have a little bit more structure there, but that you're able to kind of recognize when it's appropriate to be structured, when it's appropriate to be a little bit more open and creative, and flip that back and forth between the different things that you participate in.
Yeah, just like my art making. You pre-planned and then you improvise.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Still knowing that this is the goal that I'm aiming to go towards.
There you go. You just put a bow on it right there, Leonard. So let's give the people listening something to look at, right? I mean, you have a bunch of photos online. If they want to see more, I mean, like I said before, we'll link to some of these in the show notes. Where should they go?
They can go to my website, or
what is it? What's your website?
It's my full name, leonardsuryajaya.com. I'm pretty sure. I mean, I hope you put the link up, or you can just Google me.
Yeah. And do you have something that you think is like a particularly good piece of work, or like one of the collections that people should start with?
Oh, I'm really proud of what we did for the New York Times, just because it reflects all of these new knowledge I've gathered, and it was, I guess, the newest thing that I had just accomplished. So start there, and then I don't know, you can dig more if you want to, but also maybe I'm just too jaded. Yeah, but start with the New York Times and then dig as much as you want, but also, yeah, do that. I don't know. It's just a weird thing because like I'm not so good at like being my self promoter.
Totally.
It just feels stupid.
Yeah.
But for the sake of gaining knowledge, go to my website.
Thanks for listening. If you like the show, the best thing to do would be to send it to one of your friends who also likes podcasts. If you want more, I have an email list where I send out a weekly update with all the podcasts I've recorded and articles that I've written. I also include my favorite things that I've been reading or listening to as well. You can sign up for that at www.toddneve.com. That's I before E, or you can open up the show notes in your podcast player and click the link in there.